Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube reading guide series. Today is the 13th and penultimate video in my 14 video series talking through the correct reading order of Superman by DC. In order to create this guide, I've read the 1700 comic issues that comprise the shared Superman continuity from 1991 through to 2011, and I've used that knowledge to build this, the internet's most detailed reading guide for the world's most famous superhero. Over the last dozen or so videos, we have been looking over this guide, and it takes the form of a Google sheet that I've split into 14 different tabs, representing the 14 discrete eras I've split this period into. Each of these videos has covered one tab, and today we're looking at the 13th era or 13th tab. This Google sheet can be viewed and downloaded for free from my website. Generally, each era or tab is separated by a major DC event that I'm releasing a separate video on. So this playlist is going to contain every Superman video and every DC event video in chronological order. But if you're only interested in the DC events, they'll also collected in a dedicated 11 video playlist available separately on the channel. I will say please do watch the introductory video and the various sort of explanation videos I have around some of the language that I use when I talk about Type P and Type J readers, or if I explain why I started this reading guide in 1991 rather than any earlier. And most importantly for today's video, what I've covered in that introduction video is actually an explanation of why in particular I refer to things called triangle numbers. And that's very, very important because whilst they haven't been a feature for the last few videos, they are a feature for this video, the 13th era. So with no further ado, here, everybody, is the 13th era of Superman from 1991 to 2011. This is going to cover the era which goes directly from where the last video ended, which wasn't an event, all the way up to the Blackest Night event, which is where we're going to be covering that event tomorrow in tomorrow's event video. Remember, as we go through this, please just look at this line by line, row by row. So you should always know where to go next. Simply scroll down one row and you will see the next issue that we need to be talking about. What we're going to be looking at today is a whole load of issues, 97 issues, covering a very wide-reaching Superman arc called the New Krypton arc. Now, what is the New Krypton arc? Well, to be honest, it's kind of a line-wide event. It involves Supergirl, it's got a lot of spin-off series and so on. But the premise of it essentially is that for a brief period within DC's continuity, the bottled city of Kandor, which is a Kryptonian city trapped by Brainiac, is brought back, essentially. I'm not going to give any spoilers other than to say that essentially means that there is a city full of Kryptonians who all have the same powers as Superman existing within kind of common continuity and within the area of Earth. So with that out of the way, this is the New Krypton era, or as I'm calling it, the 13th era. Most of the issues here, as you'll see, have a note next to them, which provides you a little bit of context in terms of details that actually happen in any particular issue. So if you download this and you hover over each cell, you will see the notes that relate to this. What I've done is I've split this New Krypton era into a specific series of arcs that I think make most sense, and there's 16 arcs in total. Interestingly, there's several different ways that you can read this, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. To start off with, I'm going to talk about this arc here, which is the Brainiac arc. Now, most people don't count this as part of the New Krypton story, but it is fundamental because it lines it up. So none of these issues have triangle numbers on the cover because triangle numbers were phased out several years ago at this point. But what you need to read is the Brainiac arc, which is issues 866 to 870. What we then get into is the New Krypton arc for real, which starts off with what I've called the City of Superman arc. Now, before I dive into what these are, a couple of things that I need to point out. All these issues have distinct branding for different phases. So there's like World Without Superman, World Against Superman, various different sorts of branding like that. You can read it by branded lines. So for example, you can read all the issues that have the branding of just New Krypton and then all the issues that have the branding World Without Superman and so on. But that's unsatisfying because whilst it makes some sense, it still doesn't make clear what issues to read in what sequence within each branded period. To make it easier, what DC did is they introduced the triangle numbers or the Superman shield numbers back on the issue covers, purely for this new Krypton era, specifically brought back for this. Unfortunately, the problem is that triangle numbering and sequencing isn't actually quite correct, and some issues are unfortunately missed out. So the third and final way I'd recommend to read this is to be using this guide. Now you're probably wondering how I arrived at this, and yes, of course, I read every single issue, but I also built this off the back of this guide here that DC published in the back of Secret Files and Origins 2009. Now this is a really useful breakdown of all the issues within the New Krypton arc. However, it still has some errors. For example, it misses 3 clearly branded and triangle numbered Supergirl issues. So ultimately, even though this was produced by DC and produced and shared at the same time as the series was coming out, unfortunately it's not perfect. So back to the guide here, this is what I would recommend, and I strongly recommend you follow what I'm laying out here as the correct reading order. But obviously, if you want to diverge from that, absolutely feel free. It's just not what I would recommend, having read it based on my own experience. So the first issue I'd recommend reading is this one, which is Adventure Comics Special featuring The Guardian. Now, this is actually triangle number 3 on the cover, but I'd recommend reading it first because otherwise it ruins a pretty key cliffhanger ending from Superman 681, which we'll get to in a second. After that, I'd recommend reading the Superman New Krypton special. Most people view this as being the first issue of the New Krypton era because it has Triangle 1 written on it, but again, I would recommend against that. It's worth noting the cover for this issue has the rather annoying sightings branding where it says sightings over it, which is just some bullshit thing DC was using randomly on certain single issues back in 2008. It's not really a consistent or coherent branding, it's just meant to indicate that something important happens in that issue, which isn't really very helpful. After the Superman New Krypton special, I'd recommend reading Superman 681. Now, this does reference an attack on Air Force One that takes place during the separate Wonder Woman line-wide event, Amazon's Attack. However, reading that isn't necessary to understanding this. And this is triangle number 2. We'll do a quick triangle check, and you can see I've got all this sort of detail in the note text for every single cell as well, so you don't have to be scribbling it down as I'm talking. I'm aware I talk quite fast. After Superman 681, I'd recommend reading Action Comics 871, which is Triangle 4. The cliffhanger in issue 681 picks up directly in 871. That's why I'd recommend jumping from Triangle 2 to Triangle 4. Action Comics 871 has got new Krypton branding. It does explain a bit about Krypton here. So, for example, Krypton in this issue is described as a cultural mecca that is so revered throughout the universe that other cities take its name, explaining away all the non-Kryptonian self-named cities that Superman and Supergirl have met that are called Kandor. If you'll remember several eras earlier, back in like era 5 and 6 and 7, there was various mentions of the bottle city of Kandor, and I found it quite confusing. Well, this kind of hand waves that away. After issue 871, I'd recommend reading Supergirl number 35. This is triangle number 5 on the cover with new Krypton branding. That's followed by Superman 682, triangle 6 with new Krypton branding. We then have Action Comics 872, triangle 7 with new Krypton branding. We then have Supergirl 36, triangle 8 with new Krypton branding. We then have Superman 683, triangle 9 with new Krypton branding. And we then have Action Comics 873, triangle 10. This has new Krypton branding, but also has branding saying Faces of Evil, Lex Luthor, which is just an example of dual branding. Faces of Evil is something going on during 2008 anyway, so that's where we have it. Now, whilst the City of Supermen section largely followed the Triangle era, we're now breaking away from that even more thoroughly. The next arc I'd recommend reading is an arc I call the Mon-El arc, and that starts with Superman 684, which is Triangle 12, and this also has dual branding, so it has branding for Faces of Evil, Face of Evil Parasite on the cover. After that, I'd recommend reading Action Comics 874. This is triangle number 13 and also has branding on it saying Origins and Omens. Now, this issue has 3 stories in it. The main one ends by saying to be continued in Action Comics 875. The second one then says to be continued in Superman 685, and then the Origins and Omens short story right at the end says to be continued in Superman 686. You can ignore all of those. The next one to read is Superman 685. Annoyingly, the triangle number is entirely missing from the cover here, which is kind of stupid. And again, this includes an Origins and Omens backup feature and branding on the cover. So it actually doesn't have any of the sort of new Krypton or any of that sort of branding at all. After that is an arc that I call the Brave New World arc. Now, the Brave New World arc shows well, it kind of highlights that there are actually going to be other mini-series or maxi-series getting released at this time that are tie-ins directly to the world of New Krypton and what's going on there. In this case, we've actually got the eponymous series, World of New Krypton, and I'd recommend reading the first 5 issues here. Now, these don't have any branding other than specifically saying they're the world of New Krypton, and the triangle numbers are a bit random, but trust me, this is the sequence to read them in. So World New Krypton 1 is triangle number 16. It actually says at the end of this, to be continued in Action Comics 875, Supergirl 39, and Superman 686. I wouldn't do any of that. I'd continue by reading World of Krypton issue 2, which admittedly is triangle number 20. This says to be continued in World of Krypton 3, which is next, which is triangle 24. That's to be continued in World of New Krypton 4, which is actually next, and that's triangle 28. And that says to be continued in World of New Krypton 5, which is triangle 32. That then says to be continued in Codename Patriot Part 1, and we'll get to that, but we shouldn't go to that next. What I'd recommend going to next is the 5th part of this New Krypton arc, which is an arc called Gods of Krypton, Heroes of Earth. And this follows quite closely just the Action Comics line. We've got Action Comics 875 through to 879, then Annual 12. Action Comic 875 is triangle number 17. Again, I'll just hover over it so you can see it's got all the details there if you need it, if you download it. So it's triangle number 17. World Without Superman is the branding, and it's actually a part of a multi-issue arc called Sleepers. So this is Sleepers Part 1. The next issue is Triangle 21. It has World Without Superman branding, and it's Sleepers Part 2. Action Comics 877 is Triangle 25. Again, World Without Superman branding, and this is Sleepers Part 3. One thing I would point out about Action Comics 877 is that it introduces some total rando, which is a woman called Mirabai who's got blue face tattoos at one point. She's introduced as if you already know who she is. So I started reading this and I was like, have I missed some issues somewhere? When did she get introduced? But no, whilst it's confusing, this is actually genuinely the first time we see her, and she gets explained elsewhere. Following that, we have Action Comics 878, which is Triangle 29. That has World Without Superman branding and is the Sleepers Part 4. And then we have Action Comics 879, which is Triangle number 33, World Without Superman branding and Sleepers Part 5. Now, this actually contains a backup story for Captain Atom. So this is the Captain Atom backup story Part 1. The Captain Atom backup story goes on for almost a dozen issues, scattered pretty randomly across the issues we're going to be talking about. So, whilst I will highlight it, and of course it is written in the text here, I would stress that it's not going to make much sense if you try to read that. And to be honest, it's not very important. This issue ends by saying to be continued in World of New Krypton 6 and also Codename Patriot Part 1. Ignore both of those. What I would read next is Action Comics Annual 12. This doesn't have a triangle number, it just has an S in the shield on the cover instead, but it does seem to fit well here. Okay, cracking on, what we have next is the 6th story arc, which is called A New Hero Will Rise. This is issue 686 to 690 with an annual, so 686 is Triangle 19. 687 is triangle 23, 688 is triangle 27, 689 is triangle 31, and 690 is triangle 35. All of these are branded as World Without Superman. 690 has several to be continues at the end, including to be continued in Secret Files 2009 and to be continued in Superman Annual 14. We will take the latter on board, and you should read Superman Annual 14 next. It hasn't got a triangle number, but it does seem to fit in well though. The next arc is called Who is Superwoman? And this is still in the Superman line, but now these are the Supergirl issues. So this is Supergirl issues 37 to 43, and then the annual. And so that is Superwoman, or rather, Who is Superwoman part 1 through to part 6, which is Supergirl 42. The triangle numbers here are, well, it's going to be a bit difficult because Supergirl 37 actually hasn't got a triangle number on it. Supergirl 38 is triangle number 14. Supergirl 39 is triangle 18. Supergirl 40 is triangle 22. Supergirl 41 is triangle 26. Supergirl 42 is triangle 30. And Supergirl 43 is triangle 34. In terms of branding, Supergirl 37 has got Faces of Evil Superwoman branding on it. Again, we've seen these Faces of Evil branding before. Supergirl 38 has branding saying Origins and Omens and has a backup story for Origins and Omens. Supergirl 39 has no branding. Supergirl 40 has no branding but has a pretty dramatic reveal at the end in the sense that we find out who Superwoman actually is. In Supergirl 41, no branding, and similarly in Supergirl 42 and 43. So that's how I would read this. I would read Who is Superman, sorry, Who is Superwoman here in the reading order. Next, we've got Arc 8, which is actually codenamed Patriot, which we've heard mentioned a few times. I would read it in this order, so World of New Krypton 6. The triangles renumber at this stage. God knows why, because the last triangle we looked at was Triangle 34, but now World of New Krypton 6 is Triangle 1. It's also branded codename Patriot and says to be continued in Action Comics 880, which is where we should go next. Action Comics 880 is Triangle 2. It's branded codename Patriot. It says to be continued in Supergirl 44, and it contains another Captain Atom backup story. So if we follow that through, Supergirl 44 is triangle number 3, and again, branded codename Patriot. It directs us to Superman 691, which is triangle number 4, and branded codename Patriot. And at the end of this, I'd strongly recommend reading Superman Secret Files and Origins 2009. This has got no branding and is marked with triangle 0 randomly. After that, I'd recommend reading Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen special number 2, which doesn't have any branding but is marked as triangle number 5. What I'd recommend after that is Story Arc 9, which is called Friends and Fugitives. So this is Action Comics 881, which is triangle number 7 with World Against Superman branding. It has got a Captain Atom backup story in it. That then directs you to Supergirl 45, which is triangle number 8, again with the World Against Superman branding. That directs you to Action Comics 882, which is triangle number 11 with World Against Superman branding and the Captain Atom backup story. And that takes us to Supergirl 46 and 47, which are triangles 12 and 16 respectively, and they have that World Against Superman branding. Again, like I say, the branding is kind of helpful because it helps you group things together roughly, but as you can see, it doesn't really give you much guidance in terms of what issues to read within the branding and in what order. So again, I'd strongly recommend you stick with this reading sequence here. Next up is Arc 10, which is Men of Valor. So this is Superman issue 692 to 695. It's all branded World Against Superman, and the triangle numbers are triangle 9, 13, 17, and 21. So Superman 695 is triangle 21, branded World Against Superman, and it actually says to be continued in Action Comics 885 and Superman 696. Don't worry, we'll get to those momentarily, but I wouldn't recommend jumping to those because we need to cover the next arc, which is Nightwing and Flamebird. This involves reading 3 issues of Action Comics and then 2 issues of Superman. So the Action Comics issues are 883, 884, and 885. They're all branded World Against Superman. They all contain Captain Atom backup issues, and the triangle numbering for them is triangle 15, 19, and 23 respectively. The Superman issues are Superman 696 and 697. They don't contain any backup stories, but they do have World Against Superman branding, and their numbers are triangle 25 and triangle 29 respectively. You'll notice here that for Superman 697, it does say to be continued in Adventure Comics 8. We'll get to that, but not quite yet. The next arc is one that I'm quite proud of having uncovered. It's not even mentioned on the DC 2009 issue guide that I flashed up earlier, despite being an essential arc and also having triangle numbering. So again, this lends a more credence to my theory that DC farm this sort of stuff out to the interns to basically make these reading guides because they just don't know what they're doing. What we need to read here for this arc that I've called Queen is Supergirl 48, 49, and 50. These are all branded World Against Superman. They have the following triangle numbers, triangle 20, triangle 24, and triangle 28. And Supergirl 50 ends by saying to be continued in World of New Krypton 7. We will get to that, but not quite yet. The next thing to do is to check out an arc called Kneel Before Rao. This is Action Comics 886 to 889. Again, they're all branded World Against Superman. And again, they all have Captain Atom backup stories. The triangle numbers here are triangle numbers 27, 32, 37, and 42. For the last one, which is issue 889, as well as having a Captain Atom backup story, this is the last Captain Atom backup story, part 11. And that ends saying to be continued in Generation Lost, number 1. I haven't read that. I didn't follow it up. The Captain Atom story was random and dull, so I ignored it. This issue also says to be continued in War of the Supermen, issue 0, which we'll get to momentarily. Okay, the 14th arc is what I called World in the Balance, and this is the rest of the World of New Krypton maxi series. It's a 12-issue maxi series, and you'll remember that we read the first 6 issues pretty much in one go. Sorry, first 5 issues up here. Issue 6 was part of the codename Patriot here. And now we're covering the rest of it off. So the remaining 6 issues all have World Against Superman branding, and the triangle numbers are triangle 6, triangle 10, triangle 14, triangle 18, triangle 22, and then for World of New Krypton 12 is triangle 26, and it says to be continued in Superman 697. Now we've already had a look at Superman 697 earlier as part of the Nightwing and Flamebird arc, so trust me, you can ignore that recommendation. The people writing these comics clearly aren't fully tied in together with one another. So onto our penultimate arc for this era, we have Battle of Brainiac. This is where we actually get Adventure Comics 8 or Adventure Comics 511. The numbering makes it clear both numbers apply because of something called legacy numbering. I'll do a video on my channel about that one day. What we have here now is branding called Last Stand of New Krypton. And that's actually on Adventure Comics number 8, which is also triangle number 30. Adventure Comics 8 also has a backup story called Awake Part 1. We'll get onto Awake Part 2 in a bit, but it doesn't follow straight away, I'm afraid. After reading Adventure Comics 8, you should read Last Stand of New Krypton number 1, which is triangle 31. Then Supergirl 51, which is triangle 33. Yes, I'm aware we've skipped some. That also has Last Stand of New Krypton branding. After that, you want to read Superman 698, which is triangle 34. Again, Last Stand of New Krypton branding. Adventure Comics 9, or 512, depending on the legacy numbering, is triangle number 35. It hasn't got any other branding, and it's got a backup story in it called Awake, Part 2. We then go on to Last Stand of New Krypton number 2, which is triangle 36. Adventure Comics 10 is actually triangle 38, and this has got a backup story for Awake Part 3, which is the end of that backup story. That goes on to Supergirl 52, which is triangle number 39, again with the Last Stand of New Krypton branding. And we then have Superman 699. This has got Last Stand of New Krypton branding. It's triangle number 40, and it actually says to be continued in Last Stand of New Krypton 3, and also to be continued in Adventure Comics 11. I like this example because it kind of highlights the ridiculousness of being a Type P reader. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I am a Type P reader and I fight constantly not to be one because it's deeply unfulfilling. If I'm reading Superman issue 699 and it's to be continued in 2 other issues, what's the perfect reading order? Which one do I read in the right order? Do I read half of the Last Stand of New Krypton 3, then a couple of panels of Adventure Comics 11? How do I do it? If they happen at the same time, how am I meant to read them at the same time? And this comes into my whole idea of Type P and Type J readers. You just have to kind of just work it out for yourself. And what I worked out was it felt to me that the next thing to read was Last Stand of New Krypton 3, which is triangle 41. That actually says to be continued in War of Superman 0, but I wouldn't do that. After that, I'd read Adventure Comics 11, which is Triangle 43. Last stand of New Krypton branding on that one. I hope that made sense. For those of you that are wondering where things like the missing Triangle 42 went, that was actually in the Kneel Before Rao arc. I believe it was there. Yeah. So again, the triangle numbering wasn't very helpful here at all. That brings us to our very last arc, which frankly hasn't got triangle numbering because it's a straightforward miniseries, War of the Supermen, 0 to 4, branded War of the Supermen, called War of the Supermen. Boom. There you go. There is an epilogue issue here, which is Superman 700, which is kind of like a capstone issue to the whole New Krypton event, and it leads directly into the Grounded arc, which is where we're going to be starting our next Superman video of the 14th era. But before we go into that, we're going to go into a slightly messy and confusing event called Blackest Night. Now, Blackest Night itself isn't a confusing event, but its impact on the Superman issues that we're going to be reading in the 14th era is confusing. But stay tuned and we'll discuss it. And there we have it. In case you're interested in knowing where these resources are, so the guides, the maps, and so on, they're all available on my website. They're all available for free. You can go into the website, which is nogodsorkings.com, and download the Google Sheet for the Superman reading order, or you can go on the website and look at these reading maps for all the various DC events and a whole bunch of other things I've got on there to your heart's desire. If, however, you are interested in a written version of this guide, then it is available on Amazon. I've recently just self-published it. It is the cheapest possible tier you can get on Amazon. So it's 79 pence UK, 99 cents American, and so on. It's free if you're on Kindle Unlimited, and there is a free sample on the website as well. The reason I put this onto Amazon is kind of a proof of concept. I'm interested to see if people are interested in the written guides, whether or not people want to pick them up. And also, it's a good way for me to bat off all the people that are going to be in the comments asking for a Batman guide. If you want a Batman guide, I don't really particularly have any interest in doing one, but I will do one if this book gets 500 reviews. So if this book gets 500 5-star reviews, then I will start doing a Batman reading guide at some point. I don't think that's going to happen, but there we are. Of course, feel free to support the channel by picking this up. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, the best way to support the channel is by picking up one of my other books, which isn't a non-fiction reading guide. It's actually a fictional, completely original superhero story. It's prose, so not a comic or words, but it's about superheroes in just a really interesting kind of post-apocalyptic dystopic idea. The first 4 books of the series are out, and if you want to support, please pick that up. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay classy.